Paul says, and take the helmet of salvation. It's important to note the two things he lists off the text. He talks about the helmet, which I believe he's referring to the function. And then he talks about salvation, which I believe he's talking about actually the asset. The helmet, he used the term, a word that is really two parts. It's one word that has two major parts. It's a compound word, peri, which means to circle or to encircle. And then he uses the word kaphel or kapali, is literally the head. Circle the head. He said, use an instrument, helmet, to circle around the head. And then he says that you ought to have as this helmet that protects the head, salvation. Now, I'm going to get to that because what he's saying real quickly is that one of the best things that can protect your mind is your soteria, your spiritual health, your mind being made new. Oh, I got to talk here because, see, some of us must recognize that he's not talking about protecting your old mind. He's advocating protecting the new mind, because the old mind was what held you captive. But in your being delivered, you were given a new mind. That's what he meant when he said, let this mind be in you that was also in Christ Jesus. So that when you are delivered, God gives you a different insight on things. Delivered people began to understand that they've been delivered from something. The dangerous reality of our time is that we spend too much time with folk who deny deliverance. And not only do they deny deliverance, but they almost, well, not almost, some of them even convince us that deliverance is a fantasy. And so here you are free, walking like your slave, because your deliverance has come under attack. Paul says you got to elevate your mind. You got to protect your mind. You got to allow the mind you have to have different management so that you don't give access to demonic, I should say demonic people, but demonic powers. Now, I'm going somewhere with this, because if you're going to protect your mind with what you know about deliverance, soteriology, or soteria, salvation, you got to keep, that helps me with my first question, because the question I was going to raise was Paul really referring to just sinners? No. Here's the problem. Most of us think that once we get saved, we are no longer under attack. But see, he don't have to attack the old mind. Satan don't have to attack the old mind, because the old mind thinks like he do. When you're under attack, it's generally because the mind you have is at opposition against Satan. And so you got to protect it, because I think, and I can prove, that Paul was referring to Christians when he talked to them about protecting the mind, because there's some folk in church that may not necessarily be Christians that don't need to protect that mind no more. You need to let that go. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe I missed it. See, before you can protect this mind, you need to lose yours. Let this mind be in you that's also in Christ Jesus. Now you don't suppose he's wanting you to be schizophrenic. You don't need two minds operating the same area. No, in order to get what he has, you got to give up what you got. And the reason some of us are still living in defeated lives is because we're still holding on to something we need to bury so we can get something we need to be resurrected with. So he tells us that when we get this new mind, protect your mind. Touch somebody, say, protect your mind. Now, you got to protect your mind, which means to guard what you've been made to know, to realize. to conceive. Paul brings this up to the Thessalonians in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and verse 8, which is my proof that he's not just talking locational. It's not just, if you will, the Ephesian church, but it could be perhaps a church-wide problem. With 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and verse 8, he said, but let us who are of the day be sober, putting on the breastplate of faith and love, and for an helmet, the hope of salvation. In other words, he's telling us who got it to put it on. You don't tell somebody to put it on that don't have it. Put on your head, protect your mind, the salvation. Now watch this. Why would he tell them to put it on? Because it's possible to have it and not have it in the proper place. The first time, in fact, we see this phrase about helmet of salvation is really an Old Testament concept. Isaiah chapter 59 verses 16 and 17 says, and he saw that there was no intercessor. Therefore his arm brought salvation unto him, and his righteousness, it sustained him. For he put on righteousness as a breastplate, and a helmet of salvation upon his head. Now what this tells us is because sometimes it's what you do before the battle that determines the outcome of the battle. It's when you're going through, it's what you put in your head before the battle ensues that helps you to deal with the struggles and the pain, the hard reality of warfare. Because what warfare is not easy. So you got to protect your mind. Well, maybe I would go farther today and tell you that the Christian soldier desperately needs the helmet of salvation because far too many times you're outnumbered in the way of opinions. Have you ever thought about the fact that you can raise up a biblical fact and folk will quickly share with you their opinion? Oh, wait a minute, y'all got to understand that. When your mind has grasped a fact and then your mind entertains opinion, you are allowing for warfare of the mind, because here is the truth. A lot of the warfare that we go through is really minimal as it relates to other folk. Much of the warfare that we go through is the mind that we face, the mind that we fight that's tied up in ourselves. That's why pride is a bad thing to have. I wish I had some help in here today. Because pride is the mind intoxicated. Pride is the mind drunk on self. Pride is the mind influenced to believe that you can handle all things all by yourself. And I come to the reality that when you start thinking that way, you're in the weakest position you can be in. But Paul says, when I'm weak, then I become strong. Because when I'm weak and recognize my limits, I start looking for help from the God that's limitless. Watch this. Y'all don't believe. He says in Romans chapter 8, verse 6, for to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace. All of these show the importance of the mind. And therefore, I want to conclude, I want to suggest that that's the reason why the mind is under attack. Because as a man thinketh, so is he. Perhaps that's what he means again in Romans 12 and 2 when he says, and be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. And then he tells you this because the mind is such an enemy that your mind can play tricks on you. Oh, y'all don't hear me.